Hey guys, today we continue our study on probability. Today we're going to look at sample spaces. Sample spaces is a way to list out all of the possible outcomes. And here's the thing with probability. You might not be playing the lottery, you might not be rolling a dice or flipping a coin, but you are always doing probability. Let's say the alarm goes off and it's time to wake up, and you are halfway awake and you go, I could get out of bed right now. And if I do that, this will happen. Or I could sleep a little bit longer and this might happen or this might happen. You start listing out all the possible outcomes of whatever decision you're planning on making. That is a sample space. And so we're going to do that again. We're going to start out with something pretty basic, flipping that coin again. Now, with the flipping of one coin, there's only two possible outcomes, heads or tails. So I have another coin here. I'm going to flip it, and I want you to think, what are you going to get, heads or tails? Okay, you got it? Think. Got it? No cheating. Here we go. Heads or tails? All right, gonna go, gonna go, gonna go, gonna go. Tails. Did you win? Heads or tails? That was your sample space. And so if you said tails, you won. But heads and tails are your sample spaces. How about we make it crazier? I'm going to do two coins now. I'm going to do two coins, and you're going to have to think of all the possible outcomes. They could both land on heads. They could both land on tails. Those are two possible outcomes. The first coin could be heads, and the second coin could be tails. That's a third outcome. Or a fourth outcome is the first coin can be tails, and the second coin could be heads. So look, we see heads, heads, tails, tails, heads, tails, tails, heads. Four possible outcomes. Think in your brain what you think it might be. Your chances of winning is 1 out of 4 because there's 4 opportunities. You ready? You got it in your head? All right, here we go. Here we go, 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 here we go. Bam, heads, tails. Did you win? If you said tails, heads, you didn't win. If you said heads, tails, you won. 1 out of 4. Remember the 4 outcomes, you picked one of them. So let's go back to our notes now. You should have these notes out in front of you. If not, get them out, and you need a pen or a pencil, and we're going to start to work through these notes. So it says an experiment or an event. We just did an experiment. We flipped coins. We talked about another experiment earlier about you getting out of bed when your alarm goes off or not getting out of bed when your alarm goes off. Okay. An experiment or event is an activity involving chance, such as rolling a dice or spinning a spinner. An outcome is all the results of the experiment. And we talked about that with the flipping the two coins. There are 4 possible outcomes. The sample space, lots of vocabulary here, is all the possible outcomes of the experiment. So remember the flipping of the coin? It says how many outcomes are on a coin. One coin, there's 2 possible outcomes. They're heads, as we would call it, or tails, as we would call it. But what if we have 2 coins? Again, we talked about that already. What are the possible outcomes? Well, we could get heads, heads, tails, tails, heads, tails, or tails, heads. Those are all the possible outcomes. Now, I can create a tree diagram, and this is something that you may or may not have to do, but you definitely have to be able to look at a tree diagram and say, is that right or is that wrong? So I'm going to go ahead and have a starting point here. It's my coin, and I'm going to flip this coin, and I could get either heads or I could get tails. Those are my two possible outcomes. But you can either look at it as flipping one coin two times or two coins once. Either way, we have the same number of possible outcomes. The second time around, again, I could get heads or tails, and I could get heads or tails. Now, I'm going to go ahead and list out all these possible outcomes and watch how I get them. You can see here I have heads, heads. That's one possible outcome. Heads, tails. That's another possible outcome. Tails, heads. That is another possible outcome. Or tails, tails. That is another possible outcome. So the first thing we did is a tree diagram. The second thing we did is we listed out all the possible outcomes. But there's a really quick, fast way that you can figure out the number of possible outcomes. If there's two possible outcomes on the first coin and two possible outcomes on the second coin, we can know ahead of time that there's four possible outcomes. It's kind of like that lottery talked about the other day when it's like 2.5 million. They're not going to list all the possible outcomes. They just know that if so many players play and there's so many tickets sold, that's the possibility of one person getting that outcome. And it's a lot more complicated than that. I don't really know all the rules to how they pick things, but you get the idea. So here we have spinners. So spinners are important for you to pay attention to the little sections on the spinners, making sure they're all the same size. Because if one section of a spinner is bigger than another section, then you know that you're more likely to land on a bigger section. So I'm looking at my spinners, and they're all evenly divided. In fact, the first spinner here has 6 sections, and the second spinner has 3 sections. So I already know that if I said, what are the chances of me getting one thing on the first spinner and something else on the other spinner, that there's 18 possible outcomes on that. So let's go ahead. We can list all those possible outcomes. This is going to seem kind of tedious, and you're going to want to not write super big. You're going to want to write kind of smaller. We're not going to do this a whole lot, but you do need to understand the process. So on the first spinner, I could spin 1, I could spin 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Those are all the possible outcomes. And I could roll 1 on the spinner, and on the second spinner, I might either get yellow, brown, or red. If I roll a 2 or spin a 2 on the spinner, on the second spinner, I could also get yellow, brown, or red. And this same process goes all the way through. So I want you to take a moment. You can pause the video if you need to. And I want you to write out, we are creating a tree diagram. All right, again, pause the video if you need to do that. All right, once you have all these written out, we're actually going to list out all the possible outcomes. So, like I said, on the first spinner, I might spin the number 1. And on the second spinner, I might do yellow. Or I could do 1 on the first spinner and get blue on the second, or brown. Or I could do 1 and I could get red. So I'm now going to list out. And guys, I'm going to just tell you, we're not going to do this that often. So I want you to make sure that you do it now so you have an understanding. It will enhance your understanding to actually work this out. 5 white, 5 brown, 5 red. Whoa, Let me get that back again. Let's see, 5 or 5 yellow, 5 brown, 5 red, 6 yellow, 6 brown, 6 red. Those are all my possible outcomes. And if you count them all, they will equal 18. There's 18 possible outcomes. So let's just do total number of outcomes. We're not going to list them all or do any of those sorts of things. We're just going to look at the situation and say, this is how many outcomes there would be. So if I find a sample space, if I roll a dice, well, we already said that for a dice, there are 6 possible outcomes. If I flip a coin, there are 2 possible outcomes. So altogether, I have 12 possible outcomes. That was pretty easy, right? All right, let's move on. I'm going to find number 2. I'm going to find a sample space if I spin a spinner with 5 sections. And I roll a dice, which you already know is 6. So altogether, there's going to be 30 possible outcomes. A lot better outcomes in the lottery. Let's go to the next one. For lunch, I choose 4 different kinds of sandwiches and 5 different kinds of chips. What kind of variety could I have with that? Well, if I take the 4 and I take the 5, there are 20 possible outcomes in this situation, 20 possible combinations of sandwiches. All right. I hope that ended kind of easy there. But this is actually not that bad of a lesson. It's just kind of tedious at times, but be patient with yourself. You can do it. See you later. Bye-bye.